Stephen A. Smith, bruh, do you even understand how to deal with situations like these? Really? Really? Well, I guess I'll just have to call you Stephen A. Myth again for comments that you made regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion at ESPN. Wow, just wow. This is Sports Guy Talking that you guys are watching and listening to. I am Dustin Tran, your host, as I am here today to talk about Stephen A. Smith bragging about turning female ESPN analysts into media stars on First Take. For some weird reason, Stephen A. Smith thinks that arguing from this angle will put him back in the good graces of the woke community. Obviously, Stephen A. Smith has been under fire for recent comments that he made about Caitlin Clark and the WNBA as it triggered Monica McNutt big time. Before I say anything else though, I want to present you guys with the topic question. So here it is. Does Stephen A. Smith deserve credit for turning female ESPN analysts into media stars? This is honestly a laughable question because the answer to this question is obviously no. Of course, Stephen A. Smith does not deserve credit for turning female ESPN analysts into media stars. That credit should belong to the executives working at ESPN and these woke politicians that are trying to put these DEI initiatives into the workforce. And Stephen A. Smith thinks that if he takes credit for turning female ESPN analysts into media stars, that will make the woke community go back to liking Stephen A. Smith. Once again, Stephen A. Smith is proving that he is Stephen A. Simp. The reason why I am calling him Stephen A. Simp today is because of the fact that he is simping to the woke community. He's essentially begging them to take him back in their place because obviously he violated a woke commandment on Monday when he defended Caitlin Clark and got on WNBA players for being dirty to Caitlin Clark. He also credited Caitlin Clark for the rise of interest in the WNBA. Obviously, that is a violation of the woke commandment, but at the end of the day, we all know that these woke people use their own commandments and their own rules to get by with their miserable lives, and obviously they can't have a white player become the face of their sports league because what is the WNBA standing for? It is standing for the Woke National Basketball Association, and obviously in the Woke National Basketball Association you can't have white players become the face of their sports league. You are supposed to be raving about black basketball players, and obviously Stephen A. Smith violated that commandment. Now I'm glad Stephen A. Smith didn't apologize to Monica McNutt, although I'm not going to give him credit for not apologizing because that was a pretty obvious situation as to what you're supposed to do in that situation. Obviously, there was nothing to apologize because Stephen A. Smith was 100% right. However, what he is responding to the beef and clashes that are going on Twitter makes very little sense. Again, you look at how Monica McNutt was talking about increased interest in the WNBA, but Stephen A. Smith is not even addressing that at this point. Instead of addressing Monica McNutt's point on the Stephen A. Smith show, now he is talking about how he has elevated women into high levels of position at ESPN, which is just laughable in and of itself. I don't think Stephen A. Smith should deserve any credit for that. Once again, Stephen A. Smith became Stephen A. Myth in the sense that he told lies, but of course we all know Stephen A. Smith to be a pathological liar. Remember the time where Stephen A. Smith claimed that he made 17 straight threes in a high school scrimmage? Yeah, that is obviously laughable, and that story never happened, because if that story happened, every Division I school would have offered Stephen A. Smith a full ride scholarship. They would have basically called him Steph Curry of the 1980s, because that is obviously impressive stuff to do. But obviously, he never made 17 straight threes in the game. But we all know Stephen A. Smith is a pathological liar, just like he's being a pathological liar here in terms of taking credit for the increased amount of diversity, equity, and inclusion at ESPN. It's just laughable how he lists out all those minority women in positions of power. Obviously, the execs at ESPN and these woke politicians in our country are the reason for the increased diversity, equity, and inclusion. Obviously, Stephen A. Smith has nothing to do with that. But before I ramble on too much further about what Stephen A. Smith had to say, I'll show you guys this clip of what Stephen A. Smith had to say on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Roll the film.
You ever heard of Monica McNutt? You have now, because she's on First Take a lot. Shanae Ogumake, absolutely wonderful, spectacular basketball analyst, etc., WNBA player in her own right. Ask her how it's been to be on First Take. How about Andrea Carter, who's a rising star in this business? How much do you think First Take helped that? What about Kimberly Martin? What about Molly Kiram herself? Now, I have sat back for years and taken a lot of shit from people. Some who don't know what the hell they're talking about. Some who act like they don't know just because they want to get at me. I could care less about people getting at me. I just want you to be accurate. And it is highly offensive to me when somebody implies or flat out states, like Monica McNutt did this morning, which was factually incorrect.
Stephen A. Smith getting mad at people who aren't telling the truth. Are you kidding me? Stephen A. Smith is one of the main people that likes to lie to sports fans in terms of what happened in the sports media world, but that's besides the point. You look at how Stephen A. Smith is getting on Monica McNutt for the wrong reasons. For the record, I actually agree with Stephen A. Smith's stance in terms of the Stephen A. Smith-Monica McNutt debate, but I don't agree with the logic that Stephen A. Smith is using to get to his conclusions. He is using flawed logic to make the points that he is using. Obviously, he is distracting himself away from what the actual topic was. It was about increased interest in the WNBA, and now all of a sudden Stephen A. Smith wants to talk about the rise of women and the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion at ESPN when that wasn't even the actual topic. This guy is now trying to take credit for the rise of Kimberly Martin, the rise of Shanae. I'm not even going to say her last name because I don't know how to say it, but it's the Nigerian woman that talks about basketball. And you look at the rise of Monica McNutt, it's just laughable to me that a sports TV talker is taking credit for the increased diversity, equity, and inclusion that is occurring at ESPN. And the other thing that I want to say about that is, why is he so proud to brag about increased DEI at ESPN? That's one of the main reasons why basketball coverage on ESPN sucks, is because they're not hiring the best available talent to talk about basketball. They're out there firing guys like Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson just so they can have an all-woman broadcast team go ahead and commentate a playoff game. For the playoff game that you guys are probably wondering what I'm talking about, they had an all-women crew for the Orlando Magic Cleveland Cavaliers Game 1 playoff series that happened in the first round of the NBA playoffs. That was an all-woman crew. Obviously, that was not the best available talent out there, because if they really cared about the available talent that was out there, they would have never fired a guy like Jeff Van Gundy. They would have never fired a guy like Mark Jackson. But obviously, because Mark Jackson has different political views from everybody else at ESPN, he gets fired. And then Jeff Van Gundy, who was one of the best color commentators at ESPN, he gets fired because people want to go ahead and overpay for mediocre talent at ESPN. So they're like, okay, we're going to go ahead and get rid of Jeff Van Gundy, even though he's actually a really good commentator in the National Basketball Association. But that's another story for another day. And you look at how Stephen A. Smith became Stephen A. Simp again on First Take, because he had a chance to address this issue yesterday. It was with a bunch of women and Shannon Sharp and Molly Karam. He wanted to take credit for the rise of women in sports media. Roll the film.
There's warfare going on. Some people are on the front lines. Others chirp about being there, and then they go hide. But they got the work. They the ones that squeak the loudest. That's the stuff that irritates me. And so I make sure to let everybody know it ain't bragging. It's that it's a war out here, and I'm always ready to get down. It's just that simple. And my man Shay is as well. That's why I say what I say. That's why First Take is what it is. That's why we number one and we ain't going no damn place. Let's roll, Molly.
Once again, Stephen A. Smith panders to the woke audience, and he thinks that because he is pandering to them at that very moment, they're going to accept Stephen A. Smith back into their community. But obviously that is flawed logic in and of itself, because the woke community serves loyalty to no one, because you must follow all woke commandments all the time, or else you're going to be kicked out of their circle. Obviously, the people in the woke community are not happy with Stephen A. Smith whatsoever. Think about it like this. It's like a guy that constantly sims to a girl in a relationship, and he constantly feels insecure about himself, so he constantly tells his girl that you're beautiful all the time, even though she already knows she's beautiful all the time. And obviously, that girl gets bored of the guy and eventually leaves him, and then the guy gets emasculated. It's one of the main reasons why when I'm flirting with a girl, or when I show interest in a girl, I usually try to avoid commenting pointing that she's a beautiful girl to her face, even though I'll show signs that I know that I'm attracted to her because of the fact that I don't want her to necessarily have power on me. I need to make sure that I get to control the narrative, and then she's going to eventually fall in love with me. That's the kind of approach that I take in life, and I think Stephen A. Smith needs to go ahead and take that approach in real life when it comes to dealing with the woke community. He should say, the fuck with the woke community. I get to think how I get to think as a black man, and what I've done for the black community. He needs to have his own thoughts for himself. But of course, Stephen A. Smith is trying to go back and sim to the woke community because he believes that if he sims to them, they'll go back and accept him with open arms. But that's Stephen A. Smith for you in a nutshell. He doesn't really know a whole lot of anything. He's just nothing more than a loudmouth guy. But what do you expect from an installed plant at ESPN? We all know that Stephen A. Smith is all about getting that money, and Stephen A. Smith will do anything to make sure that he gets his bank account increased by the day. At the end of the day, we all know Stephen A. Smith to be a flawed individual. That's just who he is. I'm not surprised that Stephen A. Smith is bragging about turning female ESPN analysts into media stars. But again, why are you proud of that fact? Why don't you just be proud about your own media career? Because we all know that Stephen A. Smith doesn't really have a whole lot of talent whatsoever. We just know Stephen A. Smith to be some loudmouth guy at ESPN. And look, I'm not here to say that Stephen A. Smith is a boring guy, because he's not a boring guy. He's actually a successful guy. He's actually a guy I respect in the sports media world, even though I think his sports knowledge is incredibly limited, but he does know how to draw an audience, so I will give Stephen A. Smith credit there. But as far as whether or not Stephen A. Smith deserves credit for turning female ESPN analysts into media stars, that is a laughable talking point, because he obviously doesn't deserve credit for that. And more importantly, why are you bragging about the fact that you are turning female ESPN analysts into media stars? It's not something that a normal person would be proud of. They would just say, okay, fine, good job to those women for getting increased roles at ESPN. But for a guy to just go out there and brag about that, it's just very weird in and of itself. So that's why Stephen A. Smith does not deserve credit for turning female ESPN analysts into media stars, as his comeback attempt at Monica McNutt was extremely flawed for several reasons. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to Sports Guy Talking, like the video, and please comment down below. If you guys do that, I may shout you guys out in my Instagram story every Monday. That'll be for the @DustinNasTran Instagram account. Make sure to follow me on Instagram @DustinNasTran and that Sports Guy Talking. Also, go follow me on Twitter @DustinNasTran. Again, go ahead and do those things that I just told you guys to go do. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the content that was just produced. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed that video. Want more Sports Guy Talking, the home of great sports content? Make sure you click that subscribe button to get the latest from Sports Guy Talking. Go ahead and like the video. Comment down below. Check the description box on the video in order to follow my Instagram and Twitter. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from the YouTube channel, Sports Guy Talking.